Welcome back to Dear Oakland. Today we have with us Victor. He's an entrepreneur. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Victor Diaz. I'm the owner of Renegade in Oakland, and recently a second store just opened in Los Angeles. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
How has your experience been in Oakland, running a business, potentially living? Like, how has all that been?
Well, I opened Renegade in 2020, and it was difficult because it was right at the start of COVID. And the things that I was expecting to struggle with in terms of having a small business, like any small business, like how do you get people in the door and things like that, were definitely more problematic because of COVID, right? Because you couldn't, or you weren't supposed to have people in the space. So I had to pivot really quickly, and we had to build an e-com site and stuff like that. Problems that most entrepreneurs experience in their first year of business. So it was difficult. It was very difficult, and there were times when I wasn't sure if we were going to make it, honestly.
So how do you feel about all this negative PR around Oakland?
Well, in my experience, and I've been in a lot of different conversations with business owners, with city officials, with the mayor, and I've had calls and conversations with the media about some of the negative press that Oakland gets. And I feel like, in my experience, the people who start the conversation around the negativity in Oakland are usually people who do not live in Oakland. Or there are city officials who, rather than taking responsibility and or being in conversation about how to make Oakland a better place, seem to pass off the problem as somebody else's problem. In other words, when I'm in conversations with entrepreneurs, people who teach and live and work in Oakland, the conversations are almost never about what you hear in the media, So that's frustrating. When it's the only narrative put out in media, it's even more frustrating. Because as a business owner, as a resident of Oakland, you want people to feel like they can frequent and move throughout the city as they want to. And in fact, most people do. Sadly, there are a lot of great stories that don't get told when the cloud of negativity is like all we're hearing. So that last point is probably my biggest frustration with the negativity. Is there's so many great businesses that have opened. There's some great community heroes that are not being acknowledged because of the negativity. So that's my biggest frustration with the negative narrative.
What do you think outsiders get wrong about Oakland, and how would you describe the city to someone who's never been?
One of the things I think they get wrong is that the problems in Oakland are solely in Oakland. Does Oakland have a problem with homelessness? It absolutely does. Does it not have enough mental health resources? It absolutely does not. We could use more mental health resources. We could use more solutions, radical and traditional, to house the unhoused. But in my experience traveling, that's true of a number of cities, including rural America, including cities that do not have budget deficits. So it's a much more complex problem that Oakland is not the only city facing those issues. So I think that's one thing that they get wrong. I think another thing they get wrong is that people don't care and or they're not doing things about the major issues in the city of Oakland. And I know a number of people who work tirelessly to make Oakland a loving place, a healthy place. And so I think that what might seem to some as people are not doing enough, I know a lot of people who are doing a lot of good hard work.
Sure. In rural America, you mentioned that there's also homelessness, but would you agree that that manifests in a different way, and that might be the reason that people aren't highlighting it as much? Also, in rural America, there's not a lot of tourism. There's not a lot of people wanting to like move there, start a family. There's not a lot of things to do. So when we think about how people think about homelessness in a bustling city or like an up-and-coming city as opposed to rural America, like how would you explain those differences?
Well, I mean, let me say this. I don't want to stereotype or categorize rural America
Sure.
in any other way that I want someone to categorize or stereotype Oakland,
yeah,
right?
For sure.
What I do know, because I don't live in rural America, that for people that are unhoused, people that are living in inadequate housing, people that are working full-time and are not able to afford their housing, that's happening in suburbia, that's happening in rural America, and the problems are super complex.
Sure.
And unless you live there, I don't want to categorize or stereotype what are the root causes and or what are the solutions for that.
Sure.
And again, I'll just default that I do know people that are working really hard to address the underlying and root causes. I'll give you one specific example. The tiny home village off of Hagenberger Road.
Yeah.
I know people who have worked really hard to make that project happen, to provide tiny homes for people who are transitioning back into stable housing, and who are working at bringing programs to help with all of the other resources like job training, resume building, and on, in terms of what it takes to move out of that situation. So again, these are people who are, to me, are heroes in the community. They don't get highlighted. Their work does not get highlighted. They don't have adequate resources. And to me, that's the bigger problem, not the unhoused. Like the unhoused is a big problem, but let's highlight why the people doing the work don't have the resources so that they can get the resources and be more efficacious in their work, you know? So that would be my wish, I guess.
Actually, this is a good way segue. This is a good segue to the next question. Is there anything you would change about Oakland?
Yes. So I spent 20 years as a public school educator. The majority of that, I was a school principal. I started my own charter schools. And I didn't start the charter schools because I was like this dogmatic, I believe in the privatization of schooling, because I don't believe in that. I worked in continuation and alternative education for my whole career, and I worked with kids that I was seen as the second and third generation that were not successful in schools. In other words, their parents were high school dropouts, their grandparents were not successful in the very same school districts. I worked for Oakland Unified, I worked for Berkeley Unified, and when you see that generation over generation, the question I was asking myself was, what more can I do? So I'm going to answer your question because I don't feel like our city officials are asking that question, but I'll tell you how I get there is that as a school leader, I think of my locus of control and what I can do to change the experiences of the kids whose lives I have in front of me. And when I felt like I wasn't doing enough, I started a charter school, so that I could try to have even a greater impact. And so it took me years to call myself a leader, right? Because I didn't feel like I was having the results I wanted to say that I was actually a leader. But once I got better at being a school principal and being a site director and working with kids and families and community agencies, and we were having greater success, and we were changing the trajectory, changing the outcome of kids whose previous generation of parents were not going to college. When we were having that kind of success, I started to call myself a leader because I was like, okay, we're now doing the work. That is what's missing to me in the leadership of Oakland, is that they get these titles, city council, board of directors, mayor, and they do not function as leaders. And in my definition of that is that a leader doesn't make excuses. They asked to be in that position, and you solve problems. You solve problems. And in my experience, the leadership in Oakland, specifically the leaders of publicly held offices, are not solving problems. They're making excuses for their inept, in their poor decision making, in their inability to work with disparate groups to bring them together, in their inability to listen, to then be able to act. So those are the problems that I see are much deeper rooted. Yeah.
And then the next question would be, what brought you here and what keeps you here?
I grew up in San Jose in a exclusively Mexican neighborhood.
Yeah.
The only time I didn't live in a predominantly people of color neighborhood was when I went off to college, and I lived in Westwood or in Berkeley for graduate school, or in Boston. Just personally, I feel more comfortable living among people of color. I feel more connected to and inspired by my elders that have lived in the same city, and just riffing off the theme that I just said, because we see that in our elders who had a ton of strikes against them, if you will, or cards stacked against them, or whatever metaphor you want to use, and didn't make any excuses, and worked hard and raised their kids with dignity and respect and love, and taught amazing loving values, and looked out for kids in the community and their own. So I was raised in that ethos. And I only experienced that in communities of color. I've, in fact, have never experienced it outside of a predominantly people of color community. And I've lived in predominantly white communities, I've mentioned, you know. In fact, the most miserable I ever felt in my life was living in Westwood, for example, you know. Where I was getting in fights as an adult with other individuals in the community who lived the exact opposite of what I just described, you know? And so that's what brings me to Oakland, is that there are cultural norms, and there's a history, a beautiful history of resistance, of art, of love, of values, of tradition, of spoken word, that reverberate in the most beautiful ways that I couldn't imagine living anywhere else.
Yeah.
And so therefore I couldn't imagine opening a business or running a business anywhere else, you know?
Another segue, but what keeps you excited about what you do, and what challenges do you face as an entrepreneur?
So just as it took me years to assume the role as leader, it's taken me just as long to now assume the title of like community leader, you know, because in a school site, for the most part, some kids and families are sent to me, right, because the district assigns people. But as a community leader, if I say, come to our shop for a community run, well, no one has to go, you know? So you've got to be real about what you're doing, or else the community I just described will sniff that out and will be like, this dude's fake, we're not coming back. Like, this dude is not real, we're not gonna fuck with him, so we're not coming back. So I'm trying to put myself in positions with the community where I have to reflect on what my role is, how I'm learning, how I'm growing, how I'm giving, and hope that the community comes and continues to show up And when that happens, it's magical, and that's what keeps me coming back.
What about the challenges you face as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, the challenges are real. Operating a business at the end of the day requires capital, requires money, and it isn't easy to do all of the things that we're doing programmatically. If I were just selling running shoes, then that would probably be, it would definitely be a little bit easier. But it would also be a lot less meaningful. It would be transactional, and that's not why I opened a business. And so that's just part of it. Just like when you're a school leader on a site, if you ask to be in that role, you don't make excuses, right?
Okay, so can you tell us the origin of Renegade Running and being a small business owner in Oakland? And aside from being a small business owner, what other roles hold significance to you?
So I started out running in the late 80s and early 90s and got pretty fast and much more competitive in the mid 90s. So I've been running for a long time.
Yeah.
And I've been fast enough to say that there was a time when I was in the 1% of the 1%, right? Of at races, okay?
Yeah.
And with those accolades and with running fast, that doesn't automatically mean you're going to be welcomed into all spaces, all running spaces. I'm not even talking about and I, as I got a little bit older, I also started racing competitively with cycling and triathlon, and in those spaces, which were even more homogeneous, white, affluent male, white, cis male spaces, you're even less accepted. Or you're accepted as this binary sort of one-dimensional person, i.e. an athlete who is just fast.
Yeah.
You can't bring your whole self to those spaces, right? And so that is what I experienced early on as a competitive athlete. And when I left running competitively at that level, I continued running and racing, not as frequently and not as competitive, because I was working full time and raising 2 kids at the time. I saw the sport of running continue to be stagnant in its growth in terms of whom it was welcoming into the space. Until very, very recently, just prior to COVID, there was the emergence of what is now known as running crews that started in the UK, and predominantly people from the African diaspora, with Pata running crew, with Run Them crew. So these are people from the African diaspora living in Europe who probably equally didn't feel safe in those spaces and created their own space that they could be safe and run among. And so that made its way to the US. There was a crew out of New York called Black Roses, and then it continued to head west. So the proliferation of these running crews that were multilingual, some of them exclusively Black Men Run or Black Women Run, to see the proliferation of these groups, either with in a singular focused person of color group or in a multicultural, largely BIPOC community, man, I was inspired. And just the same way in which I described the city of Oakland, that's how it felt to see the emergence of these crews. So as my professional career as an educator was starting to wind down, or I was looking to transition out of it, I saw that the emergence of these crews, and I immediately felt like there was a massive gap between the products that were being sold strictly for profit purposes and the communities that were emerging that were buying these products and giving them all of this money. And I thought, I want to be that interlocutor. I wanted to be the person in between that said, don't just give them that money, Don't just give me your money unless we're providing something in return.
Sure.
And so that was the motivation.
And then I guess my other question would be, what are some roles that hold significance in your life, aside from being an entrepreneur, aside from being an educator?
That hold other value, you said? Well, this absolutely, this role of being a community leader, we're striving toward being recognized as a community leader holds significance because, again, the BIPOC community doesn't give you that title willy-nilly.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's like you got to earn those stripes.
Yeah.
And again, if you're fake, the community's going to let you know.
Sure.
So, you know, if one day that, you know, the work that we are doing is talked about with the same love or reverence that our elders have been recognized, especially the city of Oakland, for making change, then that's a value I aspire to, you know? Yeah.
And so with that also, what does community look like for you in Oakland? And then can you talk about like track nights and like other running club initiatives that, you know, that have come from Renegade Club running? Because from when I went there for my first time, which is like very late in the game, I just noticed each week it just like more people would show up and more people show up. So what's that experience been like?
Well, to your first question, what community looks like? So I personally hold two distinctive visions of community. I love to see groups organize around a single purpose.
Yeah.
I'm super motivated to see Asian women get together, older black men get together. Like, that's a pretty brave, I think, political act to say that we need a space for our own, by our own, just for ourselves. Yeah. When I see that, I'm inspired by that, especially when, and even in nearly all cases, when I'm not a part of that community. Right. Because it communicates to me that the elders in our community are working hard to fill in the blank, preserve their language, preserve their culture, to connect and demonstrate love, to just hold each other up, on and on and on, right? Yeah. And so there's great power in that. And sadly, in today's political climate, people are afraid, white folks are afraid when they see a singular group of people getting together. Yeah. That's intimidating to them because it's a quite powerful thing, right? So anyway, that is one definition of community that I subscribe to, and in that instance, even when it doesn't include me, right? Like that's a beautiful formation of community, a powerful formation of community, and one that I love to see form. My other definition of community is when all are welcome, with the centering or with the focus of BIPOC folks. Yeah. I think that's a really important thing, right? So it's like everybody is welcome, but the white narrative, a white male narrative, a white dominant narrative is not what we are forming around or because of, okay? So speaking of track night, everyone's welcome, okay? A traditional white narrative, a traditional white male narrative on the track specifically, if I organized around that, would look very different. Right. For example, I would say, you're not fast enough. When you reach these times, come and see me. Right. That's a narrative that has been pervasive in track, that has largely been created by, fueled by, continuing to be perpetuated by a white male athlete, okay? So that doesn't mean that white men are not welcome in the space. Right. It means when you come into the space, we're gonna run with a very specific purpose. Right. And you probably saw this when you were there. The biggest emphasis that we place on running is running together. Right. So when you run and people do run at different paces. Right. I'm also not of the belief that we all have to like equality, right? Like, which to me is like an absurd word. It shouldn't even be in our vocabulary. I don't believe that like we're all here, let's all run 9-minute pace because we're all equal. No, people have to run at different paces. So, but when you are running at your pace, you are stronger together, running together. And that is a different narrative than here's the 5-minute per mile pace group. I get faster by beating the both of you. That's a white male narrative. We get faster together is a narrative that originates from our indigenous ancestors. And that is how I operate the track. And that is true whether you're running a 15-minute mile or a 5-minute mile. And there are people who come and they do try to run the way in which they did in high school or in college or the way they think they're supposed to get faster. And 9 times out of 10, they come back and they fit in to what we're doing, or they don't come back at all. And so that's how we operate. That's how I operate. That is the difference between centering our work on how my elders have shown the way for us to be stronger, versus just adopting some like other narrative.
I just want to give a shout out because I shaved off like 1 minute and 15 seconds off of my mile, and it was, I swear it was because I was doing track nights on Wednesday. So
You came out pretty fast already though. I remember that your first time.
I was like, I shot at first. You know what's funny is like another friend of mine was like, because I've been running too, but I used to run by myself for the longest time. And he was like, oh, you should check out Renegade Running. And I was like, no, they're like real runners. I'm a little intimidated. But then I just showed up one day, so, and it did work.
And your girl's out there killing it too.
Yeah, I know. So, back next week. Yeah.
What are some challenges Oakland is currently facing, and what are your hopes for Oakland's future?
Again, the biggest challenge is the lack of leadership. It's, again, I'm going to just continue to maybe riff off this narrative of like the way I was raised, how our communities were dismantled is when you attack the leaders in your community, or said in the affirmative, when the leaders in our communities, our elders, when we listen to their voice, when we see their actions, we're a better family, we're a better community. We learn how to move within spaces. And as a city, I don't feel that there's leadership. We need police officers. We need politicians to bring different groups, disparate groups together. Labor, landlords, business owners, and the other, right? Like, I do believe we need all of these different institutions. But if they're going to function differently, if the city's going to function differently, then we need real fearless leadership who can both look historically for inspiration, look forward, and be bold enough to put a plan out there. Like, if you think of the last 2 mayors that I had closer proximity to, I had no idea what they were trying to accomplish in the city. I had no idea what the metrics were to know if we were making progress toward those things or not. And I'm pretty tapped in and pretty connected to what is happening. And so, in the absence of leadership, in the absence of a courageous plan, then oftentimes great things happen as a result of happenstance. Great things happen as a result of community leaders just trying to push forward. Some chaos happens because people are bickering about who should be responsible. And so my hope is that there is a more bold, a more vocal leadership who is willing to put a plan out and say, look at what I want to accomplish, what we can accomplish together, and here's how we can track the progress that we are making. I want to say one thing really quickly, because this is, I think, a huge point. When I opened a charter school, I had to propose a plan which was like 300 pages in length, and it had measurements that the school district, the city school district, the county, and the state would be able to monitor to know if I was making progress.
Yes. Yeah.
And they looked at my budget to make sure that we were appropriating the right amount of funds to lead those programs. And so I think about my accountability in terms of opening a school for a couple hundred people. And when I see how the city's run, I'm thinking, where is the accountability? Where is your plan? And and who is holding you accountable?
Yeah.
Not on a 4-year cycle basis or a 6-year cycle basis or whatever, but on a much more consistent basis. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I feel like that is what is missing in public leadership in general, and with the city of Oakland more specifically.
Yeah. So before we get into our rapid fire round, the last question is, so you recently opened the new location in LA. So how has that been different in just comparison to setting up the store in Oakland back in 2020?
Mm-hmm. Well, the city of LA, where I opened in the Silver Lake area, has a shopping district. I opened in LA more to assert our brand, to elevate our brand within the running industry itself. Yeah. So it had nothing to do with the city politics or even the geography for that matter, because like I could have opened multiple stores in the Bay Area, for example, and even at a lower cost. Yeah. But it made a more bold statement to open a store in Los Angeles, in the running industry. My understanding in the running industry, there are about 700 stores in this category, what they call run specialty. Yeah. And looking at the data, I just was named to be a board member that's a group called Running Industry Diversity Coalition. Mm-hmm. And so the RIDC's role is to help diversify the business of running. Yeah. So I just was named as a board member within this nonprofit.
And so, flex.
What's that?
Subtle flex.
I didn't know that it was actually in the beginning, but I found out later that there were a lot of people that wanted this, and they actually sought me out to be on it. They only added one board member.
Even more.
So that was really the flex. I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. But the real flex, I think, is that of the 700 stores, I think there were fewer than 5 that are owned by African American, and I believe I'm the only one that's Latino owned.
Let's go.
Out of all of the stores in the U.S. right now. So opening in LA was also part of this bolder statement, like, fuck you, we can do this also, and we can do it at a high level, and that's the message that I wanted to communicate within the running industry.
Yeah, that's dope.
So that was for that. I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
Just like comparison of like, starting a business in Oakland and LA.
Yeah. So again, I actually get more frustrated when I go down to 4th Street in Berkeley and I see this small little retail district. Yeah. It's got lights, it's got parking, free parking designated. There is a plan to support and improve retail.
Yes.
Okay? There is no place in Oakland like that.
Right.
Very true.
If a community has formed, it's by happenstance, or it's because entrepreneurs have said, I'm not going to wait for the city. It's like there's a couple of businesses in Jack London Square. Right. There's a couple on Grand. There's a couple on Lakeshore. Yeah. There's a couple in Uptown. But it was they themselves pulling themselves together and said, let's clean up the street. Let's hire this, or let's put lights here. I mean, that was the effort. It wasn't someone in like a city council. Like if I'm a city council member in a district, I'm going to fight for resources, and I'm going to say I need to create retail. Small business is such a massive integral part of the city's budget.
Yes.
Retail is this dying entity within the small businesses.
Yes.
And it's strictly because of the lack of support. It's not because of the genius or lack of genius. It's not because of the ingenuity or inability to adapt, because these are businesses that adapt, business owners that adapt better than anyone. It's the lack of leadership that is saying to the greater region, this woman is, bottling organic wine, and you're making the best, pastries, and on and on and on. What can the city do to tie some common thread so we can bring people so they can come down for the day, and it's easy, it's accessible, it's free, it's celebrated, there's music, there's places to sit and enjoy. That doesn't exist. If it does, again, they're blips, they're episodic, they're largely because somebody has put someone else in a headlock and they got some small amount of money to do it temporarily. But it's not a common practice, and it's not a common practice that is growing to other. And don't even talk about East Oakland or West Oakland, where they have even fewer resources and they're trying even harder, so that's super disheartening. Again, something that I wish that I could wave a magic wand and change, because people have their houses on the line, they have their kids in the back room doing homework because they're just trying to keep their doors open, and it's like, what the fuck? Like, can you give some help that is not a one-time thing, but a well thought out, consistent, let's build it plan?
Yeah. City of Oakland, if you're listening to this, we've been to Sunnyvale, we've been to Berkeley, and we have some ideas. Hello. I think it's time to get into rapid fire.
I'm scared.
Yeah. Oh, it's nothing crazy. What are some places that you frequent? So your favorite coffee shop, restaurant, bars, any running clubs you want to shout out outside of your own?
You got to give a shout out to Kinfolk. I mean, they're killing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you go in there and you're like, can I hang out in here for like 8 hours? In fact, their business model's problem is it's too cool to, you don't want to leave. It's like, I'm telling Creighton, you got to make it less cool so people can get out at a reasonable time so you can turn it over more.
Get more customers.
The closed sign, it has an asterisk next to it, because it's like, subject to events, subject to vibes.
No, I'm just joking. You got to love what they're doing. It's a beautiful space, beautiful people. Again, if you just want to take in brilliant, beautiful, artistic folks, go to Kinfolk and just hang out. Alkali Rye.
Yeah, shout out Alkali
amazing.
Rye.
And, for everybody who's looking for I don't know if you're going to show this if you're looking for a last minute gift anytime. Anywhere, your gift giving game, it will go up 5,000% if you just go in there and get anything from there.
Shout out to Jessica.
Oh, yeah. Just the most brilliant, well thought out, amazing space. And again, if you put these businesses anywhere in the country, they're going to kick people's ass. I mean, it's like every single element of genius, of rarity, of vibe. I mean, they're just amazing spaces. I mean, those are two places right there, right off the bat.
Is there a restaurant that you particularly like?
Bombetta is Bombetta. I'm going to get emotional if I talk about Bombetta because it reminds me of my grandmother, and my tias. Yeah. But when you go there, Bombetta is just the spot.
Yeah.
And not for the food, of course. The food is insane. But to me, it's also just the hug. I go in there, and again, you talk about feeling safe and recognized. And I'm telling you, if I talk about it for 2 more minutes, I will literally be in tears. Bombetta is just, it's literally a place from heaven,
Where is it located?
It's in the, what do they call it? The Laurel District.
Yeah.
Off of Fruitvale, 1 block off of Fruitvale. I mean, Bombetta means fire woman. I mean, can you get better than that? You know what I mean? And when you go there, there's multi-generation women working in there. And this is like Michelin level food. You know, so you have all the elements covered, from the most basic boiled pinto beans to the most complex sauces that take like weeks to create. You know what I mean? I mean, so from a gastronomical perspective, which I know nothing about, it's from a whole other universe, to just like a cultural perspective of they're bringing their ancestors in that space, and you know it the second you walk in. Yeah.
What about any running clubs, or just even if you want to shout out Renegade? I know they have their community runs, track nights on Wednesdays.
You know, I haven't met anybody at Town Strides. Town Strides is killing it. I mean, I think anybody that can get folks of color out to be active, and the women leading Town Strides, they get like 100 to 150 people out on a Wednesday night, 99% people of color, probably 98% African American. That's beautiful. That's amazing. And that's a huge testament to the women doing the work to get people out. And now I see they're expanding into like yoga and movement and things like that, taking their group to local businesses and bringing the power of their group and their spending to different local businesses. Which again is the power of community, the power of movement, the power of leadership. So I would say Town Strides for sure.
Track nights? Renegades?
Track night, Wednesday night, Renegades, everyone's always welcome. Laney College, it's great to be at a community college. I went to a community college. And so it's great to be at Laney. The people at Laney we love, they're awesome. So Wednesday nights, 6 p.m., every Wednesday, just about. Everyone's always welcome.
The last question, how would you describe Oakland in just 3 words?
3 words? Super fucking cool.
Yeah. Final thing, how can people find you? How can people support your initiatives? Website, Instagram handle, anything you want people to know about?
Yeah, so probably Instagram is the best place. It's renegade_running on Instagram. There's a lot of, and you can get access to everything from there, our newsletter, our website, our addresses in both locations, and just get right up to the minute programming. There's a lot of great programming. We do a lot of great programming that has nothing to do with running, and we have a lot of programming that has to do with running related activities, just to help keep you healthy, happy, fun. So it's a combination of those things. You can find it all on Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victor. We appreciate you, and thank you for tuning in to Dear Oakland. That's a wrap.